April 15th, 1912, 2:20 in the morning. The RMS Titanic did not die from an iceberg collision. She died from structural fires that had been burning in her coal bunkers for over 2 weeks. At 2:20 in the morning, the unsinkable ship broke apart, not from impact damage, but from steel weakened by temperatures exceeding 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit in Bunker 6, directly behind the area where the iceberg struck. The catastrophic hull failure that killed 1,517 people came from metallurgical compromise, not frozen water. For 73 years, we accepted this as proof that nature can overcome human engineering hubris. The wreck, discovered 73 years later, exposes a different reality written in heat-damaged steel plating and warped bulkhead structures. The Titanic was not destroyed by an act of maritime fate. She was killed by White Star Line's decision to sail with uncontrolled fires that had already compromised the ship's structural integrity. What the inquiry never revealed is that Captain Smith knew his ship was burning from the inside when he ordered departure from Southampton. Why did White Star Line choose schedule over safety when their most valuable asset was literally on fire? The answer lies in Coal Bunker 6, located directly behind the area where the iceberg struck. Chief Engineer Joseph Bell's daily logs, recovered from the wreck site, confirm that spontaneous combustion had ignited approximately 1,000 tons of coal during the Belfast fitting-out period. For 17 days before the collision, temperatures in Bunker 6 exceeded 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to compromise the tensile strength of Harland and Wolff steel plating by 75%. Captain Smith knew the fire was uncontrollable with shipboard equipment, but White Star Line's scheduled maiden voyage departure could not be delayed. Too much money and reputation were at stake. What passengers never realized was that they were sailing aboard a ship that was literally burning from within, with structural integrity compromised in the exact location that would later determine their fate. The iceberg did not sink the Titanic. It simply finished what the fire had already begun. This is not speculation. Fireman John Dilley testified to the British inquiry about a fire in the bunker adjacent to the bulkhead, but his testimony was quickly dismissed. Survivor accounts described crew members working frantically to move coal from affected bunkers, not just to feed the engines, but to remove fuel from the fire zones. Photographs taken at Southampton show dark patches on the hull exterior, discoloration from extreme internal heat that the company attributed to cosmetic smudges. The official narrative of an unavoidable accident caused solely by an iceberg collision conveniently absolved White Star Line of responsibility. The truth about the fire remained buried in classified documents and suppressed crew testimonies, until modern investigation techniques revealed heat signatures in recovered hull fragments. Coal bunker fires were not uncommon in early 20th century shipping. What made Titanic's fire catastrophic was its location, directly adjacent to the area that would later suffer impact, and its duration. 17 days of uninterrupted burning created the perfect storm of compromised structural integrity precisely where the ship needed strength most. Marine engineers now understand that steel exposed to temperatures above 950 degrees Fahrenheit loses approximately 50% of its tensile strength. At the estimated 1,200 degrees reached in Bunker 6, that loss approached 75%, transforming the unsinkable Belfast steel into a brittle shell waiting to fail under pressure. When the iceberg struck, it did not just puncture the hull. It collapsed an already compromised structure. The timeline of events leading to disaster began long before the iceberg appeared on the horizon. On March 20th, 1912, while Titanic underwent final outfitting in Belfast, over 6,000 tons of coal were loaded into her massive bunkers. Coal quality varied greatly in this era, and much of Titanic's fuel had been hastily sourced from Welsh mines, where recent strikes had created supply shortages. By March 25, 1912, spontaneous combustion, a common hazard with improperly stored coal, ignited in Bunker 6. Initial reports from the engineering crew to Captain Edward Smith described a manageable fire. Chief Engineer Joseph Bell initially believed the fire could be contained through standard firefighting procedures. He focused on isolating the burning section and removing adjacent coal to create fire breaks. By March 31st, White Star Line executives, including Chairman J. Bruce Ismay, arrived in Belfast to assess the situation. Records from the Harland and Wolff archives reveal a tense meeting where Bell presented evidence that the fire was spreading rather than diminishing. The options were clear: delay the maiden voyage to extinguish the fire properly, which would require partially emptying and cooling the bunkers, or proceed with departure while managing the fire at sea. Financial calculations dominated the decision. The Titanic had cost the equivalent of $400 million in today's currency. Every day of delay meant thousands in lost revenue, disappointed wealthy passengers, and negative publicity. The company's stock price was tied directly to the ship's punctual maiden voyage. April 2nd brought troubling developments. Fire suppression attempts had failed to contain the growing thermal damage. Temperature readings taken through monitoring ports showed the fire intensifying. A metallurgical assessment team from Harland and Wolff warned that prolonged exposure to such temperatures would compromise the integrity of adjacent bulkheads and hull plating. Despite these warnings, on April 5th, the decision was finalized. Titanic would depart as scheduled on April 10th. To compensate for the ongoing fire, a fire watch was established. An additional crew were assigned to continuously move coal away from the burning section. These men worked around the clock in brutal conditions, breathing toxic gases while shoveling burning coal. As passengers boarded in Southampton on April 10th, oblivious to the danger, White Star Line officials orchestrated a careful deception. Inspectors were shown only selected areas of the ship, and the coal bunker access was restricted under the pretext of final loading. Captain Smith's orders were explicit: maintain the schedule at all costs, manage the fire discreetly, and reassure any concerned crew members that the situation was under control. By April 12th, the fire had spread to adjacent bunkers, requiring the reassignment of additional crew to prevent a potential explosion. Chief Engineer Bell's private log, later recovered from his quarters in the wreckage, reveals his growing alarm. Bunker temperatures exceeded safety parameters. Bulkhead 6 showed visible deformation. Permission to reduce speed was requested to minimize structural stress, but the request was denied. The final entry, on April 14th, just hours before the collision, indicates that temperatures in the affected bunkers had reached approximately 1,200 degrees Fahrenheit, well beyond the point where steel maintains its structural integrity. The ship was already failing from within when Lookout Frederick Fleet spotted the iceberg dead ahead. The final hours of Titanic present a minute-by-minute account of how fire damage transformed a survivable incident into history's most infamous maritime disaster. At 23:40 hours on April 14th, Lookout Frederick Fleet spotted an iceberg approximately 500 yards ahead. He immediately rang the warning bell 3 times, then telephoned the bridge and warned, "Iceberg, right ahead." First Officer William Murdoch ordered hard a starboard, which counterintuitively would turn the ship's bow to port under the period's tiller commands, and he telegraphed the engine room for full reverse. The massive ship began its sluggish turn, but physics worked against the 46,000-ton vessel. Titanic's turning radius at cruising speed required over half a mile to execute a full evasion. At 23:42, the inevitable occurred. The starboard side of the ship made contact with the iceberg. Witnesses reported a grinding, scraping sensation rather than a violent impact. Under normal circumstances, this glancing blow might have resulted in manageable damage. Modern computer simulations indicate that an undamaged Titanic, striking at that angle and speed, should have suffered breaches to at most 3 or 4 watertight compartments, not enough to sink the vessel under her design parameters. What transformed this survivable incident into a catastrophe was the location of impact, directly adjacent to Bunker 6, where steel had been subjected to extreme temperatures for over 2 weeks. As the iceberg scraped along the hull, it encountered not the resilient steel Harland and Wolff had specified, but metal compromised by prolonged heat exposure. At 11:43 p.m., the fire-weakened plates failed catastrophically, not merely puncturing, but collapsing along a section estimated at 300 feet in length. Water rushed into 6 compartments simultaneously, instead of the maximum 4 the ship was designed to withstand. The breach was both wider and longer than should have occurred with a properly maintained hull. By midnight, water had reached critical levels in the forward compartments. The ship's pumps, designed to handle standard leakage, were overwhelmed by the massive influx. Captain Smith, 4th Officer Boxhall, and Thomas Andrews, Harland and Wolff's designer aboard for the maiden voyage, conducted a damage assessment that revealed the horrifying truth. The ship would sink. What none of the passengers knew was that engineering crew were fighting two disasters simultaneously: the inrushing water and the still-burning coal fire, which now threatened to cause explosion as seawater contacted superheated surfaces. Survivor testimonies later described seeing steam eruptions from ventilation shafts, the result of cold Atlantic water meeting bunker areas still at temperatures exceeding 1,000 degrees. Between midnight and 2:20 a.m., as passengers loaded lifeboats and the band famously played on, the ship's structural integrity continued to deteriorate. The forward bulkheads, already weakened by heat, began to buckle under water pressure. Metallurgical analysis of recovered hull fragments confirms that these failures occurred along heat stress lines consistent with prolonged fire exposure. The final moments came at 2:20 a.m. As the bow submerged deeper, putting enormous strain on the midship section, the vessel broke apart precisely at the junction between the fire-damaged sections and the relatively intact aft portions. The fracture pattern visible in wreckage photographs shows characteristic brittleness, consistent with heat-compromised steel, rather than simple mechanical overload. In the aftermath of the disaster, White Star Line faced an existential threat. If evidence of the pre-existing fire became central to the investigation, the company would face not just financial liability, but criminal negligence charges. The decision to sail with a known uncontrolled fire would constitute reckless endangerment of passengers and crew. Within hours of Carpathia's rescue operations, a comprehensive strategy to suppress the fire evidence was implemented. All engineering logs relating to the coal bunker fire were classified as company confidential and removed from surviving officers. The 214 surviving crew members, many from engineering departments, were isolated upon arrival in New York and required to sign non-disclosure agreements before receiving their pay. The British Board of Trade investigation, led by Lord Mersey, focused almost exclusively on ice warnings, wireless communication procedures, and lifeboat regulations. Fireman John Dilley's testimony about a fire in the bunker adjacent to the bulkhead was quickly redirected. When asked directly about fire damage, White Star Line representatives characterized it as routine combustion, fully under control, and unrelated to the disaster. The financial stakes extended beyond White Star Line. Lloyd's of London, the primary insurer, had underwritten the Titanic for £1 million, about $140 million in today's currency. Their policy contained standard exclusions for pre-existing conditions and undisclosed hazards. A finding that fire had compromised the ship's structure before the collision would have invalidated the insurance claim. The 1,517 families who lost loved ones were told their relatives died in an unavoidable accident, the unfortunate collision with an iceberg too large to evade. The narrative of nature's power overcoming human engineering became the accepted story, one that absolved the company of responsibility while creating a marketable tragedy of hubris and fate. The industry-wide conspiracy of silence extended beyond White Star Line. In the early 20th century, coal bunker fires occurred on approximately 1 in 10 Atlantic crossings. If public confidence in maritime safety collapsed, the entire shipping industry would suffer. Major companies like Cunard, Hamburg America, and Norddeutscher Lloyd all had vested interest in maintaining the iceberg-only narrative. Technical evidence that might have revealed the truth was systematically suppressed. Thomas Andrews' design calculations, which would have shown the impossibility of sinking from the reported ice damage alone, conveniently went down with the ship. Surviving engineering officers who might have testified about the fire were transferred to distant shipping routes or promoted to positions requiring confidentiality. The few contemporaneous reports that mentioned the fire were dismissed as sensationalism or confused accounts from traumatized survivors. The New York Times briefly reported on April 17, 1912, that fire had been discovered in one of the coal bunkers, but quickly abandoned this line of investigation when official sources denied its significance. 73 years passed while the ocean kept its secrets. Then, on September 1, 1985, oceanographer Robert Ballard's expedition located the Titanic wreck at a depth of 12,500 feet. The initial images revealed something unexpected. The damage to the starboard side appeared inconsistent with simple ice impact. As remotely operated vehicle cameras documented the wreckage in greater detail, marine engineers noted distinctive patterns of hull distortion near the impact zone. These patterns, outward bulging, warped rivets, and characteristic discoloration, matched known signatures of heat-compromised steel rather than pure mechanical damage. By 1994, metallurgical analysis of steel samples recovered from the debris field provided the first scientific confirmation of the fire theory. Microscopic examination revealed crystalline structures consistent with prolonged exposure to temperatures exceeding 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. The metal showed evidence of recrystallization and carbon migration that could only occur through sustained heating, followed by rapid cooling, precisely what would happen when fire-weakened steel suddenly contacted freezing Atlantic water. Computer modeling conducted by naval architects in the early 2000s confirmed what the physical evidence suggested. When normal steel hull plating was subjected to simulated iceberg impact at Titanic's estimated speed and angle, the resulting damage was insufficient to sink the vessel. Only when the simulation incorporated steel with properties degraded by heat exposure did the catastrophic failure pattern match the actual disaster timeline. The breakthrough in documentary evidence came in 1998 when researchers gained access to previously sealed Belfast shipyard archives. Engineering reports dated March 28, 1912 documented thermal anomalies in coal storage areas adjacent to frames 21 through 25, precisely the section that would later encounter the iceberg. Maintenance records indicated emergency repairs to heat-affected bulkhead sections just days before departure. Perhaps most damning was the recovery of portions of Chief Engineer Bell's personal log, preserved in a leather case found in the debris field. His final entries expressed explicit concern about structural compromise due to persistent bunker heating, and they noted that port authorities had not been fully apprised of the ship's thermal situation. Expert testimony from naval architects, marine engineers, and metallurgists has since confirmed that the coal fire alone would not have sunk the ship. The combination of fire, weakened steel, and iceberg impact created the perfect conditions for catastrophic failure. The fire transformed what should have been a survivable accident into history's most infamous maritime disaster. The evidence vindicated those few contemporary voices who had tried to bring attention to the fire. Fireman John Dilley, whose British inquiry testimony had been so quickly dismissed, was posthumously recognized as having tried to reveal a critical truth. His simple statement that there was a fire in the bunker adjacent to the bulkhead contained the key to understanding why Titanic sank so rapidly and completely. The revelation of the coal bunker fire's role in the Titanic disaster transforms our understanding of this pivotal historical event. What appeared to be a simple tale of hubris versus nature's power reveals itself as something far more relevant to modern concerns, a case study in how commercial pressures can override safety considerations with catastrophic consequences. The real lesson of the Titanic is not about icebergs or insufficient lifeboats. It is about corporate decision-making that prioritizes schedules and public image over addressing known safety hazards. This pattern repeats throughout industrial history, from the Union Carbide disaster in Bhopal to the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. In each case, warning signs were present but ignored due to financial and schedule pressures. Modern parallels are disturbing in their financial similarity. Internal documents from recent corporate disasters often reveal the same pattern. Technical staff identify potential safety issues, middle management calculates the cost of delays, and executives make risk assessments based primarily on financial rather than safety considerations. The fire revelation led to significant but delayed improvements in maritime safety protocols. Modern regulations require immediate reporting of all onboard fires, regardless of perceived severity, and prohibit departure with any uncontained fire. Temperature monitoring systems now automatically alert both crew and shore authorities to thermal abnormalities in cargo and fuel areas, strengthening overall safety oversight. Engineering ethics were profoundly influenced by the Titanic case once the full story emerged. Professional engineering societies now emphasize the obligation to report safety concerns regardless of commercial implications. The engineer's responsibility to public safety is recognized as superseding loyalty to employers, a direct response to the pressure Chief Engineer Bell faced to downplay the fire danger. For the families of the 1,517 victims, the fire evidence provides a different kind of closure. Their loved ones did not die from an act of God or an unavoidable natural disaster, but from preventable corporate negligence. This transforms the narrative from tragic fate to justified anger, and in some cases has led to symbolic legal actions against White Star Line corporate successors. The Titanic fire cover-up represents an early example of corporate information control that continues to this day. The systematic suppression of evidence, the careful management of witness testimony, and the creation of an alternative narrative all foreshadow techniques that would be refined through the 20th and 21st centuries by corporations facing liability for preventable disasters. Suppression of truth became a recurring tactic. Perhaps most importantly, the Titanic fire revelation reminds us to question accepted historical narratives, especially those that conveniently absolve powerful interests of responsibility. The iceberg story provided a perfect shield for corporate negligence, a tale of nature's power that concealed human failure. By excavating the true story of fire and compromised steel, we honor the victims with truth rather than comfortable mythology. The unsinkable ship was defeated not by ice alone, but by the deadly combination of fire, compromised steel, and corporate decision-making that valued schedule over safety. In this complete understanding lies both tragedy and warning, a lesson written in fire and steel that remains relevant more than a century later. The RMS Titanic's passengers died not from the hubris of challenging nature, but from corporate negligence that chose schedule over safety, profit over protection. Their tragedy reveals the hidden fire that burned for 17 days before ice finished what industrial irresponsibility had begun. For more investigations into the concealed truths behind history's most notorious disasters, subscribe to Ocean Attacks. Join us next week as we expose the suppressed evidence of corporate negligence in maritime disasters that continue to shape safety protocols today.